Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Sean. As Sean said, this expedition that we did in May and June of 2021 was supported by the grant, and that really helped us out, paid for most of our flights, and just made doing something like this a lot more accessible. So thank you to the Alaska Alpine Club, and thank you to the family of Peter MacKeith. So on May 17th of 2021, we departed to the Alaska Range with a main goal of climbing Denali's Cassin Ridge. It was Jonathan and I, Ethan, and we were joined by Jonathan's father, Rob Koenig, for part of the trip.
All right, so me and Ethan have been longtime friends. We met each other in middle school and have been friends pretty much ever since. We did a lot of cross-country skiing, running, downhill skiing in high school together. And then starting in college, we started to learn to climb together. So we did our first top ropes together out at Grapefruit and kind of taught ourselves the ropes and everything. And just a few years later, here we are. And back in 2019, I went on an expedition to Denali that was also supported by the MacKeith Grant with, as you can see on the left, Sam Kendall and Jordy Maish. And here's Ethan was supposed to join us for that expedition. And it was commemorated to him and his ACL, which suffered a loss that winter. So he's not able to join us. But we had in mind to climb the Cassins since last fall. And we set out training for that goal pretty much all last winter.
So our training might not have looked like training in the traditional sense. We were really just focusing on getting a lot of volume climbing as well as ski touring. Our main form of training endurance is ski touring, which I still believe is really the best training you can do for something like this, because the most exhausting part of climbing Denali is ski touring with a ton of weight on your back or in a sled. So we did a lot of rock climbing as well to make sure that our technical goals in the Alaska Range were manageable for us. So we got a lot of volume rock climbing in various places in the lower 48, lots in Red Rocks, all over. And a lot of our ski touring and ice climbing was done in Bozeman, Montana. So Highlight Canyon and the various mountain ranges that you can ski tour there. Both these photos are from Bozeman. The one on the left is Jonathan climbing a thin little pillar in Highlight. And then the right is some ski touring in Beehive Basin near Big Sky.
All right, and these other two photos, one is a long ice climb in the Beartooth Mountains of Montana. The one on the left here, it's about a 2,500 foot ice climb that we practiced simul climbing. It's a system we were planning to use for the Cassin, where the leader climbs attached to one end of the rope and places protection along the way as the follower is also climbing at the same time. And so we wanted to get that system dialed. It's a little less safe than traditional multi-pitch tactics where the leader is being belayed up and then the rope is fixed to an anchor and then the follower follows up on belay, but it allows you to save a lot of time while ice climbing. And then this photo on the right is Ethan climbing a cool pillar in Cody, Wyoming. So we spent 4 days at the end of the season last year in March, ended the ice climbing season in the lower 48 in Cody, Wyoming, where there's a lot of really high quality multi-pitch ice climbing routes where you get a lot of hiking in and a lot of ice climbing in a day.
So eventually we made our way back to Alaska, to Fairbanks, and we started preparing for our expedition. And that elapsed a full 5 days, basically, of getting gear repaired and packed and meals prepared and packed. And most of it was focused on food, is what takes the most time. So we were focused on foods that have, like, the goal was to make most of our foods 4 calories per gram to save on weight. And then we'd have 2 pounds per person per day, 30 days for 3 people. So you're looking at 60 pounds of food per person, 3 people, 180 pounds of food to prepare, pack, and get to Talkeetna and fly in with. So it ended up being 200 pounds of gear per person that we flew in with. And a lot of that was heavy food for the airstrip because we were planning on spending 5 days at base camp. And we brought real food to base camp, like nice pasta and burrito stuff. And then in addition to that, we had all our technical climbing gear for the Cassin and ski touring gear for going up the West Buttress. So we were bringing more gear up the West Buttress than people might typically bring. But we ended up leaving base camp with maybe 175 pounds per person. So we left a lot of the heavy stuff down there just as comforts for when we arrived and when we were going to fly out.
All right, so getting down to Talkeetna was not without challenges. I was driving a minivan down to Talkeetna, and my dad was bringing a truck down to Talkeetna for a friend who lives in Anchorage. And on the way down, a little bit before Healy, I got a flat tire, which is the photo on the right. You can see how it's all like bulged out. And so that put a little bit of a damper on our trip, just leaving Fairbanks, trying to get down there. And luckily we were able to find like a random guy who would fix our tire and had like an extra tire that would fit that we bought from that guy. And then we made it down to Talkeetna late that night. And the next day was a weather day where we couldn't fly. So we waited around in Talkeetna and just hung out all day, not knowing if we would fly out the next day or in an hour. So we were basically had all our stuff packed and we were all waiting around ready to go until the next day when we flew out.
Yeah, so we flew into the Kahiltna airstrip there on May 17th, and we immediately set up camp at the airstrip. And we were planning on spending like 4 to 5 days there. There were a few smaller climbing objectives around base camp that we wanted to do. And those were mainly Bacon and Eggs, which is on the shoulder of Mount Hunter, and the southwest ridge of Mount Francis. We ended up with fairly marginal weather for most of the time at base camp. So we only got to do one of those climbs, which was Bacon and Eggs.
So here's some photos of Bacon and Eggs. On the left, you can see the like a distinct ice runnel that flows up through the middle here this cursor, and that's kind of where the route follows. You come up this ice ramp on the left and then ice climb all the way up through there. And that was a really great intro to climbing, technical objective in the Alaska range. When you first get there, the scale of everything is so huge that it's hard to really like know what it would be like climbing one of these big faces. But this 1,500-foot ice climb proved to be an excellent warm-up for the Cassin. We climbed this route in a little over 3 pitches of simul climbing, and it was very fun, very excellent climbing, and with great views of the Tokasina Glacier over the other side and Mount Huntington.
So after 4 days at base camp, which much of it was spent sitting in a tent, but fun sitting in a tent because you meet people, and there's quite a few people at base camp, and it can be a good time. But we were getting a little restless, and we decided it was time to start heading up the West Buttress, where we were acclimating for the Cassin, which is now the standard practice. If you're going to climb a technical route on Denali, you're generally going up to the West Buttress, and you might even take the summit, and then you're coming back down and doing whatever technical route you have your eyes on. So on May 21st, we started hauling loads up the West Buttress. We had one bad weather day at Camp 1 at 7,800 feet. And in total, we spent 6 days moving from the airstrip up to 14 camp, which is fairly standard. I think they recommend 7 days, but we wanted to get ahead of a bad weather window. But it can be quite fun moving up the West Buttress because there's so many people. It's a very social experience, and you meet people from all over the world. One night at Camp 1, we had multiple large teams of Russians move in next to us, and we spent maybe 2 hours laying awake just listening to really loud Russian language exchanges outside of our tent. And there was also a group of military climbers that were kind of on the same program as us going up the West Buttress, which was cool to see because they're using such honestly antiquated heavy gear to get up this mountain, and it kind of puts things into perspective when you're carrying some, down coat that's a few ounces.
So on the left, you can see us setting up our cook tent here. That was always a really difficult and laborious process because you have to saw with your snow saw through really dense, hard snow, and then dig it all out. And then to make it really ideal, you have to dig pretty deep. And a lot of days we would set up our cook tent. It would be after breaking down camp, hauling a load up the mountain, and then at the end of the day, we'd have to set up camp again. And so those were some of the hardest days on the lower West Buttress. Another challenge we had, which is similar to 2019, is on the lower glacier, it just gets really hot during the day. And so just because all the sun beating down on you and getting reflected off the great glacier. So we were drinking lots of water, had to melt a lot of snow for water. And, it just is another thing that's challenging about Denali. It's a mountain of extreme warm and cold temperatures. So my dad, Rob here, he's in the red, he was really into the social scene on Denali. We met people who had already met my dad. And you're like, oh, you guys are with Rob. And they were he's a really friendly guy and loved talking to all the folks there.
Here you see him practicing measures to keep the sun from beating down too heavily on the top of his head.
This photo is of Ethan applying sunscreen to the top of Rob's head.
Like
Just
grease.
Sweet.
So sometimes we'd be hauling loads and actually have pretty good ski conditions on the way back down because we were double hauling. We're bringing one load up to the next camp and then coming back down to our previous camp. And this was one of those days where we hauled a load up and then we got to enjoy a nice ski back down to our previous camp. This is overlooking the Peters Glacier on the right here. This is called Squirrel Hill between 14 and 11 camp.
All right, once we arrived at 14 camp on May 26th, and we arrived with just enough time to set up camp that day. The second day getting into 14 camp, we had hauled a load up to just below 14 camp the day before. And then that next day we had to break down camp and haul that another load up all the way to 14 camp. And at this point, we're not super acclimatized to 14,000 feet. And so we're breathing hard, got a heavy load, and then we have to set up camp at 14. And setting up camp was probably one of the hardest few hours of most of the lower West Buttress until summit day.
Yeah.
Just because of how labor intensive the whole day was, and we didn't have a lot of water left by the time we were setting up camp. We got camp all set up. Felt good to be established at 14 camp because that's like the waiting spot where you acclimatize for your summit push, and you don't have to haul a load up any higher on the mountain, which feels really good. But over the next few days after we moved into 14 camp, we spent time acclimatizing up above 14,000 feet. So that meant going up to the base of the fixed lines, which was maybe about an hour ski tour up from 14 camp, and skiing back down. We took a few laps after the storm where we had really good skiing. And then over the next few days, we went up to the bottom of the Orient Express to check out ski conditions up there. And then we went to a little ways up the bottom of the Mesner Couloir to assess ski conditions there. And we found the Mesner to be extremely icy and with the whole section of blue ice that wasn't really skiable, but the Orient Express seemed more promising for ski conditions.
So on June 2nd, we felt well acclimatized and we decided that we would do our summit push. We left around 5 a.m. So it was very cold when we started, probably 20 below at least. And it didn't really warm up the whole day. We spent almost the entire day in our puffy gear. Going up the fixed lines, you're cramponing on ice, and that really can make your feet cold. We got bottlenecked behind a few parties sometimes, and when you can't move as quickly as you want, you end up getting colder and colder. So the warmest temperatures of the day actually greeted us on the summit, I would say. And the right picture here is us leaving 14 camp in the morning. And then the left picture is us on the summit in the afternoon, still bundled up.
So some of the biggest challenges of our first summit day, other than the altitude, which both of us felt pretty good with altitude until about 18,000 feet. But on the left here, you can see Ethan, this is on the 16 ridge above the fixed lines. And Ethan is here trying to warm up his toes. So just trying to stay warm was a big challenge, especially because we started fairly early during the day and the sun wasn't quite as warm, especially at that higher altitude. And then another big challenge for me is pretty much starting at 17 camp. I really had to take a poo. And so I feel bad because the altitude, and then higher and higher we go, I'm like, oh no, I really got to go. So I ended up having to choose between going in the pants and going on the football field at 19,000 feet. So I chose to go at 19,000 feet, which was not the most pleasant experience, but felt good to shed some weight.
I was sitting on the summit ridge at the time, just looking down at Jonathan, and I see him wander off the path that everybody's taken, and he's got an ice axe with him, and I see him chopping a hole, and I'm pretty affected by the altitude at this point, and then he pulls his pants down.
So yeah, after we got up the
Not everybody can say they've done that.
yeah, after we got up the last hill, Pig Hill, we dropped our packs just below the summit ridge there, and just ran up, tagged the summit, didn't spend much time on top, and started coming back down.
Yep. And while we were up there, we decided that we did feel good enough to attempt skiing the Orient Express on the way back down. Plus, it was in full sun at the time, which was appealing with how cold we both felt most of the day. And it seemed like probably the fastest way back to 14 camp. So on this left photo here, this big face in front of the two skiers, it has two main couloirs on it. There's an hourglass one on the left. That is the Messner, which is probably the most classic ski line on Denali. And then to the right of it is the Orient, right over here. We would have liked to ski the Messner, but we had deemed the conditions unskiable, and I think pretty much everybody did this year. So we went for the Orient instead. And finding the entrance was quite tricky. It took us a little bit of poking around, standing on some rocks and looking. But eventually we found the best way into it. And it involved a pretty steep blind rollover, probably over 50 degrees skiing to get into the main couloir. And then all the way down, it was extremely variable conditions. You'd go through like a foot of powder into a bomb-proof wind crust and back and forth and everything in between. So it was a lot of hop turns and traversing and just doing that over and over again for about 5,500 feet from the top to the bottom. And lots of breathing, because hop turning at 19,000 feet it takes a lot of wind out of you.
Yeah.
But in the end, we made it back to 14 camp just under 13 hours after we left.
So after we summited, we kind of settled into life at 14 camp while we were waiting for a weather window for the Cassin. So as you can see on the left, Ethan had a birthday up at 14 camp on June 4th here, and we had the pleasure of getting invited over by a team from Homer who was up there, and Elaine, who's a school teacher, art teacher in Homer, made this really nice no-bake cheesecake for Ethan, where she used
graham cracker crust, Jello
Yeah.
no-bake cheesecake,
Jello no-bake cheesecake.
and the infamous pink drink mix, which added that extra kick.
And then she got a cream cheese packet to cut the corner off and write happy
Yeah.
birthday for Ethan on the left.
Yeah.
And then on the right, this photo is a snow cave party that we were invited to. That was another fun social event at 14 camp. So besides hanging out with folks and partying, we also did a fair amount of ski touring and just trying to stay active and acclimatized. We went up the upper west rib up to about 17.5 and skied part of the Orient Express again. We also climbed up Rescue Gully to 17 camp and came back down. And those are just a few day activities. A lot of days we would sleep in until the sun comes and hit the tent, which is 9:30, 10, and then the tent really starts to warm up. And there's not really any rush to be anywhere up at 14 camp until the weather gets really good. So we needed like a solid 2 to 3 day weather window before we could launch for the Cassin.
Here's some other down day activities. One party brought a wiffle ball and a bat, and we had a nice baseball game one day. Some other friends coined their, specifically this guy, Joey, on the right here, he opened a fictional business called Joey's Crappy Crevasse Crepes. And they weren't even crepes. They were just tortillas fried in butter. But they were trying to get rid of food, and they did a pretty good job at it. We also, every night you'd listen to the weather, and there's trivia. So, but most people ended up calling it 8 p.m. lies because the weather forecast was quite unreliable. And then you'd always do the ask other people what they think about the weather. Any given day, I might spend a few hours talking to people about weather and mulling it over in my head, but it really didn't do any good until you get the high pressure system. And then there's also the poo crevasse at 14 camp. So the big old crevasse that you can throw your poo bags in, and if you fill one of those up, that's a fun activity. But all in all, we spent 10 days at 14 camp before we launched for the Cassin, 10 days between our first summit and when we launched for the Cassin. So it was a while sitting there, but we managed to stay active and entertained.
So the Cassin is known as one of the most sought after alpine climbs in North America, just for its aesthetics. And as you can see in this photo on the left, it's just a striking ridge that goes up the whole southwest face of Denali. And I think Bradford Washburn first photographed the Cassin Ridge and said it would be one of the most classic climbs on Denali. In 1961, The Cassin was first climbed by an Italian party led by Riccardo Cassin, who the Cassin is named after. And it's fairly moderate in its technical difficulty by today's climbing standards, with 5.8-ish rock climbing on it, and WI4 ice climbing at the Cruxes. But the most daunting thing about this route is the commitment, because there's not really a great way to get down the climb besides just going up to the top. It would take a lot of gear and a lot of time to try to rappel off of it, and we only had like a short rope, one single 40-meter rope for the Cassin, and so we pretty much needed a weather window that we could take all the way to the summit, because we're not going to try to rappel down the climb.
And one interesting thing when you walk up to the Cassin is there's still an insane amount of old fixed gold line from the first ascent. So as you're climbing up it, you'll see all this rope, and it's barely rope by today's standards. It's just spindly little yellow rope that you might use to, like, you know, tie down a sled. But it's crazy how it's hanging out of the glacier pretty much up the whole route. So the evening of the 12th of June, we headed out to the Cassin. At 14 Camp, right, our neighbors were having a party complete with Hawaiian shirts. They had 50 hot dogs and buns and a full charcoal grill that they had brought up to 14 Camp. We were one track mind to the Cassin, so we did not partake, but it was tempting to go over there and just eat hot dogs and listen to techno music. But we got ourselves to go up to the West Rib Cutoff, which sits at around 16,000 feet above 14 Camp. And to get to the south face of Denali, you have to go up to the West Rib Cutoff, and then you have to descend the West Rib down to where the Cassin starts. We decided to take a variation to the West Rib down, the Seattle 72 ramp, it's called. And that's becoming the standard approach for the southwest face. It involves some crevasse navigation and some down climbing. But all in all, it ended up taking us 5 hours to do the approach to the bottom of the Cassin from 14 Camp. The right photo here that's the Seattle ramp from the base of the Cassin. And as you can see, it's pretty cracked up, but you follow a far looker's right line down there. And once you're getting into this area, you have to turn around and start front pointing and down climbing some pretty easy alpine ice. The left photo here is us walking down the upper portion of our approach.
When you were down climbing that, was it hard to find, since you're facing?
So we camped under the Bergschrund, and a party from Colorado who was at that hot dog party I mentioned earlier decided to follow us down to the Cassin, and they started up the couloir above us in the middle of the night. So we spent like the wee hours of the morning getting showered by spindrift from them climbing above us, and definitely cut into the sleep, but we managed to get up early and start climbing anyway.
here's another photo just across the valley from the base of the Cassin. You can see some of the crevasses and jumble terrain that we're traveling through to get to the base of the route. And so the next morning, we could still see the other party heading up the Japanese couloir. So we waited a little while, and it was beautiful weather, just perfectly bluebird. And so we broke down camp, made sure we both had plenty of water to drink for the day. And then we set off to start the climb at about 9 in the morning. And we climbed up the Japanese couloir in 2 simul blocks. So the first pitch, Ethan led up to the base of the Crux ice pitch. And then that next pitch, I led and climbed through, simul climbing all the way to the top of the Japanese couloir there. So on the right, you can see the Crux ice pitch here. I'm leading, and then on the left, that photo is taken from the Crux rock pitch, which Ethan was leading.
Yeah, so the Japanese couloir was 1,000 feet of mostly pure ice climbing, some little snow bands, but and it leads right up onto the crest of the ridge and you go right into this 5/8 rock crux on the left here. So after that, you get up to this really cool feature known as the Cowboy Rat. And it's just this knife edge snow arete that starts at like maybe 55 degrees, and then it gradually gets less steep. We had tracks to follow up it, which made it, I think, a lot easier. But generally, people consider it the mental crux of the route. It didn't seem too bad to us, as we had tracks to follow, and I even found some ice screws to put in there.
So this photo on the left is Ethan just getting to the top of the Japanese couloir, and then that photo on the right is the Cowboy Rat. All right, and here's another photo of Ethan leading up the top of the Cowboy Rat into the Hanging Glacier, which is about 14,000 feet up the route, or 14,000 feet on the route. Like Ethan was saying, we had tracks from another party who had started up the Cassin a little more than a day before us. And so that made moving through some of this deep snow quite a bit easier, especially some of the deeper parts on the Hanging Glacier, which is right above Ethan in this photo. So from the Cowboy Rat, we could see one of our friends that we met up there, a girl by the name of Chantel Astorga, who is planning to climb the Cassin solo behind us. And we could see her descending the Seattle ramp from the Cowboy Rat, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, and she went on to do the first female solo ascent of the Cassin, which was really cool to see. So this is me following a pitch in the second rock band, and the 2 rock bands you encounter above the Hanging Glacier and the Cowboy Rat are supposed to be less technical than the climbing below, but we found it to be pretty engaging and almost just as engaging as anything we found below it. I dropped my helmet off the bottom of the second rock band, but luckily the second rock band was quite wandery, and I really didn't need to protect my head from anything falling. but it was fun to watch my helmet tumble approximately 4,000 to 5,000 feet off the south face of Denali.
So we had really pretty hot conditions for climbing throughout the middle of the day. We were both climbing in base layers and still sweating in the sun. But at about 9:30, we reached the top of the second rock band and the end of the technical climbing, and we unroped there and started just hiking up to the next spot we were going to bivvy, which was about 17,400 feet. And temperatures started dropping quickly once the sun disappeared and we were getting really cold. Ethan had the moisture in his boots started to freeze and freeze his socks.
Yes, as soon as I arrived at our bivvy spot, I immediately, it was definitely below zero, but I immediately took my socks off. And even in the below zero temps, with my bare feet exposed to the
And it looks like they are gone. They are in charge of your. Sit tight for 1 minute.
Do we want to switch here? Yeah.
If you present, you'll go full screen.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out where we were on route bivvy. Yes, we were.
You're in the 28.
Oh, we got to unmute. Hello.
Do you guys got us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, then. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Wait, you got us, Sean?
Yeah, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Well, I think that's the way it's going to be.
Can they see the screen?
Wow.
Okay. Right. All right. So after we got to the bivvy, really cold. We set up the tent, got on some dry socks and dry clothes, and we were both super cold. It took quite a while for us to make hot water for food because of how cold it was. And just with the late night and pretty good forecasts in the future, we decided that we were going to sleep in the next day. So that's what we did. We spent about 12 hours at the bivvy, and the next morning was beautiful, no wind, and we had pretty much didn't have to wear a jacket warmer than a base layer the entire next day.
Yeah, so as Jonathan was saying, we extended our bivvy because of the great weather and we were pretty fatigued. So a 12-hour bivvy let us recover and really feel good for the next day of summiting. But we woke up to weather like this, and it was perfect blue skies. By the time we got started, it was noon, so the sun was baking, and we started up in our base layers. The final part of the Cassin Ridge, the final 3,000 feet, is pretty much just snow walking and a tiny amount of rock scrambling. So you're fully unroped, and we had put away the gear and the rope. And we really just enjoyed the day, pretty much joked and talked all the way up in beautiful weather.
Yeah, I think we both felt quite a bit better on our summit day of the Cassin than we did on the summit day on the West Buttress, just because of how much better we were acclimatized.
So we won't make you guys look at this for too long, but we felt we had to take advantage of the unseasonably warm temps on the summit. This was probably the only opportunity we'll ever get to do that.
So the descent from the top of the Cassin down the West Buttress back to 14 camp was definitely not a highlight of the trip. It was pretty warm, but just walking downhill and crampons with really sweaty, hot feet is not the most fun, especially if your toes are running into the end of your boots and you're tired from the past few days. But we made it back to 14 camp less than 48 hours from when we had left for the Cassin. And then we spent the next day packing up and descending back down the West Buttress to base camp with all of our gear, full sled, and spent most of the way on skis. But as going downhill often is, it's quite a hassle trying to ski with a heavy sled. And we certainly had our fair share of challenges wrestling the sleds through the steeper sections to the bottom of the ski hill camp.
Yeah. At one point, my sled flipped so many times that it turned my harness basically into a tourniquet around my waist. And it completely cut off my lower half. And I had to really struggle for a minute to loosen up my harness, and I had to get everything off. And yeah, I think going down with sleds is just as bad as going up with them, if not even worse. So if you can avoid it, I would recommend that.
All right, here's the aftermath of the trip. So once we got to the bottom, back to base camp, it took us about a little over 5 hours to get from 14 camp back to base camp. And as soon as we got pulled into base camp, some other dudes from Colorado started congratulating us and talking to us and sharing some whiskey with us. And before we knew it, we were we were feeling a little bit under the influence, and we still had to dig out our cash at base camp and set up our tent and everything, which seemed like quite a daunting task in that state, but we got it all done. Ethan here on the right is spilling his dinner a little bit.
Well, I'm spilling the dinner I didn't even have. It turns out when you spent 30 days on a glacier and you really didn't eat that day, that a little bit of alcohol goes a long ways. But we woke up the next day, and Jonathan managed to fly out, and then I waited there for a few more hours, and I got a flight out. They split us up because there was just a few too many people on the airstrip for one flight. But I survived my woozy hungover flight back to Talkeetna, and I was pretty glad to make it back there 30 days after we had left. So we have a few takeaways here. And that first one is never bring 30 days of food up the West Buttress. And that's because when you get up to 14 camp, especially mid or late season, there's people everywhere, every day, hauling sleds around, trying to give their food away because they don't want to pack it back down. So if you were going to head up the West Buttress, you can easily get away with maybe 20 days of food, even if you're planning for a 30-day trip.
Another takeaway is skiing downhill with the sled always sucks. So it's important to figure out your systems for the sleds and skiing downhill with the sled before you get out on the glacier. You don't want to do it your first time coming down for 14 camp. It's something I always underestimate going up Denali. It wasn't any easier this time than the last time. And
we also have no hot dog parties on there, which is mostly a joke, but it takes a lot of effort to get up to 14 camp and to acclimatize and to be ready for a big objective on Denali. So it's just good to remember that in the end, you're not up there to socialize, and when it's time to put the hammer down and do what you came there to do, that's what you got to do.
Another takeaway, which is may seem pretty obvious, is don't set up your tent directly under the base of a climb, which it might not apply for everywhere in Alaska, where so many of these places are so remote, and you might not be expecting to have anybody on the climb while you're sleeping there at night, but it's certainly something we did not account for. So, if you go to climb the Cassin, maybe pick a spot a little bit further away from the base of the route.
Yep, and don't drink too much whiskey at the airstrip for obvious reasons.
Also, time is key to success. So the amount of time that you can spend in the range might be key to either making it up and doing your dream route or not. We saw quite a few groups that just didn't have enough days. They were planning on attempting the Cassin, but they ran out of time just because everything takes so long between acclimatizing, hauling loads up the mountain, and just waiting around for bad weather. If you have like a solid chunk of time, you're much more likely to get a good weather window to achieve your goals.
Yeah, and we just want to thank the Alaska Alpine Club for the MacKeith Grant. And we want to thank Rob, Jonathan's dad, for coming along with us and keeping the vibe good. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to take them. I'm going to try to get my previous setup back and running so that we can answer questions face to face. And I think
Turned off on the side.
This is picture.
we should be good now. Yeah,
Yep, we can
Yeah.
see you.
you got us.
All right, any questions?
Oh,
Favorite meal on the mountain? Um, we had some really good, like, what was it? Like Patagonia provisions, like rice and bean stuff that we mixed with burritos
Yeah,
or
yeah.
tortillas and like cheese and bacon. That was a good burrito.
also just scrounging for things at 14 camp. We ended up making the bagels. I
Oh,
always
yeah.
loved having a fried bagel up there.
Fried bagel with cream cheese
Yeah.
and smoked salmon.
Yeah, that was good. And then as far as the mountain house goes, there's this adobo. I think, what is that? The chicken adobo.
Yes.
You can take that and like add cheese and put it in a tortilla, and that's pretty much the best way to eat mountain house, in my opinion. And as always, the backpackers pantry pad thai. That's the best one.
Yeah. Spend a lot of time eating up there.
Yeah.
All right.
On that note, what's your least favorite meal?
I think
Beef stew.
yeah.
You gotta add a whole lot of hot sauce to that one to make it go down.
Yeah, Ethan, I don't know if I had like a real least favorite, but Ethan had some issues digesting the any of the spaghetti or
Yeah,
pasta-
red sauce can cause digestive issues.
Bars, too many bars.
We got another one from the chat. What will be your next adventure?
Who knows? Jonathan and we've talked about doing Huntington next year. Nothing solidified yet. The ideal layer system.
Yeah, it's another one.
I'm a Patagonia advocate. I like my R1, my Nano Air. Those are my favorite.
Yeah, I find it's always different depending on where you go and what kind of conditions you're experiencing. But in the Alaska range, I think you usually don't need a lot of waterproof layers because it's usually pretty dry. Although it did rain the day we left, but yeah, having lots of nice breathable layers is really good. We all like the Patagonia Houdini, like wind shell. I'm a big fan of that for having a breathable jacket that cuts the wind. All right, any other questions?
I had one more. So I was gonna ask, how much experience or how many seasons did you guys like train for before you thought you were like capable of doing like a technical route like the Cassin Ridge?
Well, we both did pretty much 2 years of dedicated dirt bagging, if you will, working for a few months of the year and then pretty much climbing and skiing every day we could outside of that. But before that, we'd both been climbing for probably 6 years, and for most of that time been pretty into it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's just volume of climbing. You could certainly get to that point faster if you manage to really crank up the volume of ice climbing and just fitness.
Mm-hmm. So we got another one from the chat here. Where's that? How are the interpersonal dynamics between you all for 30 days? So my dad, how many days did you spend with us?
18.
So my dad was with us for 18 days, and then me and Ethan were together for the whole 30 days. I never felt like we had too many interpersonal issues. We all got along pretty well.
Yeah. If you can get alone time there, you have a cook tent and a sleeping tent. So sometimes I would just go read a book in the tent to be alone for a while, but I don't think we really ever exhausted of each other, fortunately.
Yeah, I think it's really important having a climbing partner that has a similar approach and risk tolerance and that sort of thing when you're looking at really big objectives, and especially someone you can get along well with. And I think me and Ethan have spent enough time together that we kind of we know each other's risk tolerance and experience level, so that takes away a lot of the questions and makes it a little easier to plan for a big objective like this.
Yeah.
All right, we got another one from the chat. Any gear you would have changed or added?
Change or added?
Fat tire unicycle.
I don't know. It would have been nice to have a two-person sleeping bag for the Cassin, because
Yeah.
that's saves a lot of weight.
You can save 2 pounds basically by getting a 2-person sleeping bag, and it's arguably warmer. But they're quite expensive.
Yeah, and
But other than that, I felt like we had our gear pretty dialed, and a lot of that came from doing all of that ice climbing this winter and doing long days where when we got to the Alaska range, it felt pretty natural knowing what we needed to do the climb.
Okay, here's another question from the chat. What was the crux for you, physical or mental? I think the mental crux for me maybe was just waiting for weather and just getting restless and questioning myself whether we were even going to get a chance to climb this, or also that first summit day on the West Buttress. After that, you feel a little bit, I felt a little bit beaten down, like I wasn't ready to go back up there again.
Yeah, it's definitely just maintaining motivation. 30 days of being out there is pretty exhausting. And at a certain point when you're waiting for a weather window that may never come, you question why you're there at all.
Mhm.
So that's probably the crux.
Here's another one from the chat. What was your motivation?
Danielle with the good questions.
I think I was really motivated to climb the Cassin after climbing the West Buttress in 2019 and just seeing this really aesthetic, cool looking ridge that goes all the way up the south face of Denali. At the time I climbed Denali in 2019, I didn't really know like how soon or when it would seem possible for me, but just seeing or hearing about how high quality of a route the Cassin was and just how beautiful a location, it's pretty motivating for me.
Yeah, for me, I'd never been on Denali, but I grew up in Fairbanks. My bedroom window as a child had a view of Denali, so it was always there in my life. And I definitely wanted to climb it from a pretty young age. And once I got into climbing, especially winter climbing, I really, and my main motivation for climbing anything is I just like climbing. I like the movement. I like the views you get up high. And the Cassin seemed like the peak of that on Denali. So that's the route I wanted to do.
Okay, we've got another question here.
Is there a time during your trip where you thought about quitting or calling the expedition? Personally, no. I don't think I ever seriously considered that.
Yeah, I didn't, there were certain, doubts that creep into your head. We were just spending a lot of time after we summited the West Buttress, waiting for a weather window for the Cassin, whether we were going to get like good weather, but I never felt like we were going to go down early, just empty-handed, just because of how much work it takes to get up to even 14 camp on Denali and get all acclimatized for the main objective. And you've got a lot invested at that point.
Yeah, early on in the trip, I joke about how we were going to be there for 30 days. And it was kind of a joke. It was like, well, hopefully we're not going to be here for 30 days. But deep down, I knew that like there was a significant chance that we'd be out there for 30 days. And that's what ended up happening. Anyway.
Did you ever question or wonder about your decision to ski down the Orient Express? How did you feel trying to find the route?
So if you didn't hear that, Rob, Jonathan's dad asked us if we ever questioned our decision to ski down the Orient. While I was doing it, I think both of us had our doubts, actually.
Yeah.
It was pretty committing and scary at times, just because of it was like very hard, steep snow. And you like if you fell, you probably would have been in really bad shape.
I never questioned that we could like get down it, because I knew if the skiing would have been too sketchy, we could have like put crampons down and down climbed it. But certainly like getting into the Orient Express, like the first maybe 1,000 feet were the most nerve-wracking for me, and where I felt like maybe the least relaxed, just because I knew if like it's pretty much a no fall zone where the consequences of falling, and like started to slide are the highest prev anywhere when we were on Denali.
Do you hear if any other people skied the Orient Express?
I did not.
Yeah, sure. Not when we were there.
All right.
Well, I think that's it. Thank you for all the questions. Thanks for dealing with our technical difficulties there. And thank you all for coming.
Yeah, look out. I'm going to share a video link on the Facebook page here for video for this trip. So should be coming out in the next 2 days here.
Thank you guys so much. That was an awesome presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sure.
You're welcome.
If anybody else has questions that they haven't asked yet, I'm sure Jonathan and Ethan would love to answer. You can shoot either of them a message, or you can send a message to the Alpine Club and we can get it to them.
Yeah, if anyone is planning to do something like this and needs a second opinion, feel free to reach out.
Also, the flag that you see in that picture, you can take on any trips that you want. Just send an email to the Alpine Club and we'll be sure to get you the flag. So if you want to represent the club, it's always available.
Yep.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
thank
you're
you,
welcome.
Sean.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
All right.